$1 million. Free to play. You just need to survive. It's the Fanatics NFL Survivor Pool. Pick one team to win each week. Get it right, move on. Get it wrong, you're out. The last fan standing take home a guaranteed $1 million cash prize. And for every player who joins, we add $1 to the pot, up to $10 million. The Fanatics NFL Survivor Pool. Play free on the Fanatics app. App access open to all. Must be 21 plus and joined by 9/8 to play. No purchase necessary. U.S. only. Void where prohibited. Subject to complete terms. See fanatics.com/game rules.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
It's Another Side of Midnight.
Political humorist T.J. McCormick.
Now, to the Bernard McGurk studios of 77 WABC.
Here's T.J. McCormick.
Joining us now here on Another Side of Midnight with T.J. McCormick on 77 WABC is Dane Wigington. Dane Wigington is a former energy industry professional. He's the lead researcher behind geoengineeringwatch.org. Everyone go there at some point. Check out geoengineeringwatch.org. That's a platform dedicated to exposing all of what he alleges are covert climate energy engineering. Listen to me. It's so early in the morning. Operations. Dane, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us here on Another Side of Midnight.
Thanks for your willingness to address what's taking place in our skies today,
yes,
which is becoming ever harder to hide, even with official denial.
Everybody's catching on to it, man. This thing went from being an Art Bell coast-to-coast type of closed circle, those who know kind of conversation, to now there's soccer moms on Facebook posting pictures of chemtrails.
Not a moment too soon. The damage already done cannot be overstated. Every day these operations are allowed to continue will manifest that damage even further. It's not just environmental and climate damage. It's contaminating every single breath we take, and we know that from extensive lab testing over many years.
Tell me about your professional experience and how that brought you into your initial stages of skepticism. When did your eyes open, and to what did they open?
Yeah, this is the last thing I wanted to do for the last 20 years of my life. I was comfortably retired in Northern California, off-grid home, Northern California. With my background in solar, my home has solar, hydro, and wind power. And no sooner did I complete this project, which was the cover article for the world's largest renewable energy magazine, by the way. My home was on the cover. I was losing massive amounts of solar power uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting, and I knew that couldn't be just, quote, condensation. I began to research the issue, found mountains of data that I was surprised I had not seen before, looked for the primary elements named in climate engineering patents, starting with aluminum nanoparticles. Aluminum, by the way, is toxic to all life forms, no exceptions. I began to test my rain. Hoped I would not find aluminum in my rain. I did. The elevation of that metal kept climbing over the course of many months. With enough research and testing in, I was forced to face the fact this was definitely going on in the skies above me, and I can't look the other way. I've been at this for 20 plus years now, TJ.
Okay, so you went from from seeing what everybody else was seeing. What was some of the specific evidence or the observations that led you to that evidence along the way?
Well, the evidence we have now, I mean, it's absolutely irrefutable. We have up-close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off.
Nozzles visible. Nozzles
yes,
visible. So those people that say, it's vapor, you've got evidence of nozzles.
We have up-close photographs as well of the retrofit nozzles mounted on wing pylons aimed into the exhaust jet stream, which the disinformation debunking people claim, that's just to drain excess jet fuel into the jet exhaust stream. Really, if you want to blow the plane up, that would be a good thing to do. They come up with any excuse imaginable to explain this away. And think about this, TJ. We have the entire global climate science community and governments all over the world discussing their desire to do this immediately, to put jets in the sky, to spray light-scattering particles to slow down the warming of the planet. But, you're not seeing what you're seeing. It's not really happening, even though anybody that's not clinically blind can see it. And, TJ, we took, at the cost of over $100K, a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration flying lab to altitude. Top scientists in it sampled what heavy aircraft were emitting, processed that at Rinster Polytechnic in New York, world-renowned lab, found exactly what we knew we would find, starting with aluminum nanoparticles.
We're talking to Dane Wigington here on Another Side of Midnight with TJ McCormick, 1-800-848-9222 on 77 WABC. Dane, we've got governments that in the last, you correct me, 6 months, a year, all of a sudden we started hearing them copping to this notion that, yeah, sure, we're going to do our best to go out and reflect light back at the sun. And so, yeah, so you people might be seeing some stuff. Was this because there was becoming a critical mass of evidence led by people like yourself? Because were they feeling that they were getting caught and they had to let some air out of the balloon, as it were?
It's getting close to a critical mass. It's becoming almost impossible to hide, but they're still doing their best to stamp out this issue. I've had interview requests from BBC, National Geographic, New York Times, USA Today. All of those requests were stomped out before they reached fruition. And I've had cooperation with people like Chuck Norris. Chuck did 3 articles working with me. He was given a warning, if you will. I know from a mutual friend to leave this issue alone, and we've never heard another word from Chuck. I worked with Merle Haggard, and he was working with Willie Nelson. They were going to help us bring this issue to light. They were given a warning as well before Merle passed. And again, they're going to try to hide this as long as they can, because the moment the public becomes fully aware of what's been done in our skies, every single climate cataclysm becomes a liability to anyone and everyone involved. They know it. They know that's the pitchforks and torches moment when the public fully wakes up to this. And about the contamination in every breath we take, these are nanoparticles. They're incredibly bioavailable and bioaccumulative. And now we have these same particles, based on peer-reviewed science studies, showing up everywhere in human organs, for example, and they're blaming it on only decomposing plastics.
I was going to say, that sounds like microplastics that's become all the rage.
Exactly. You're exactly right. But what they don't tell you is one of the primary elements named in climate engineering patents are polymer fibers, a nanoplastic, which when they published those damning reports about microplastics, they weren't even covering nanoplastics, which are smaller still and more detrimental still. And when we recovered our samples and tested at Rinster Polytechnic directly from heavy aircraft emissions, the particles we found were manufactured. They can identify that in that lab, which means not just decomposing plastics. That's why you have them everywhere from North Pole, South Pole, top of Mount Everest. They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous in the environment. So you can't separate climate engineering from this issue. And we're not denying decomposing plastics. We've trashed this planet in countless ways. It's just criminal to omit this giant elephant in the equation. For anybody who cares about the environment, the food they eat, the water they drink, the air they breathe, we have to address this issue.
So in other words, the microplastics, the nanoplastics, they have become so prevalent because they're caught up in the natural cycle of the earth. Tell me about some of these other elements that are popping up. So we'll stipulate about the nanoplastics. What else is showing up in your testing? What else is in the air and in the atmosphere now?
Aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese, surfactants. People see foaming rain or foaming runoff in places. That's because there's surfactants in this mix as well. That's all listed in the climate engineering patents. The last 100 tests we took working with the University of Minnesota all contain graphene. Graphene in our rain. Graphene is used for countless uses that are none of them benevolent, but we have geoengineering patents that specifically name graphene, climate engineering, ice nucleating patents. So, TJ, you remember when the blizzard in New Orleans last January? Mm-hmm. They heavily sensationalized that. Blizzard in New Orleans, blizzards in Florida, blizzards on the Gulf Coast. Yep. Chemical ice nucleation means you can seed clouds with chemically nucleating elements that create a frozen precipitation event out of what should have been a liquid precipitation event. Those are patented processes. Chinese government openly stated on the record, everyone covered it, every major media source covered it, that they were creating snowstorms with these types of elements. And yet, if you bring it up here, you're treated like a tinfoil hat wearing nutcase. What didn't they tell us when there was a blizzard in New Orleans that exact day, January 21st of this year? It was above freezing and raining throughout much of the polar regions, Alaska, Greenland, Iceland, Siberia. So again, look here, don't look there. They're trying to skew people's perception of how much damage is actually done to the climate while at the same time inflicting even more damage. This is an immediate existential threat. People need to look up wake up and do some research.
We're having a fascinating conversation with Dane Wigington here on Another Side of Midnight on 77 WABC. Again, if you want to dig deeper into what Dane does and knows, you go to geoengineeringwatch.org, where there you can also find more information about his documentary, The Dimming. We're talking about the geoengineering operations. When I think about the word destabilization, it sounds like somebody's behind it. It sounds like there's a reason. It's a means to an end.
The stated purpose for these operations: solar radiation management, cloud albedo enhancement, stratospheric aerosol injection. Those are the science terms. We stick to those terms to gain traction. The chemtrails term is fine for personal conversations. It's completely destructive for anything beyond that. That's the incident marginalization term. Stick to the science terms. So the stated purpose, to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy to slow the warming of the planet.
Right.
What else does it do? Destroys the ozone layer, completely disrupts the hydrological cycle, and traps more heat than it deflects. And TJ, for the whole green community that's pushing renewable energy on us, it's not renewable, but it's alternative energy. And again, part of my background, I've been off-grid for 25 years, solar, wind, and hydro. Climate engineering radically disrupts and diminishes all three forms of alternate energy. Blocks the sun, diminishing. Commercial solar plants are making half their design output because of climate engineering operations blocking the sun. It's diminishing precipitation in dams like Hoover Dam, Page Canyon Dam in the southwest, with about 40 million people dependent on that power, because it's blocking the hydrological cycle.
Yeah.
And it alters wind flows, which is rendering the wind turbine farms useless. So again, how come the green community isn't talking about this issue?
And yet at the same time, as you're describing some of this stuff to my virgin ears, I could have almost attributed half of this stuff to the green community. There's some extremists out there on all sides of every issue.
Yes.
The ends justify everything. I'll paint the picture for you, right? One time I needed to make some extra money. In my adult life, I needed to make some extra money. I was actually pushing a car around an airport service. I was driving for an airport. So I'd say this is about maybe 20 years ago, right? This guy is in my car. We're having a conversation about politics, about the world, like you do. You shoot the breeze in that scenario. And this guy, who almost appropriately had a German accent. He's telling me about overpopulation of the world. And the overpopulation of the world is very, very bad for the survival of the planet. And so, you lose some people. It's not such a bad thing. And I said, hold on a minute. I said, are you telling me that you're okay with, the conversation was a lot more in depth, but basically at one point I said, so you're telling me you're okay if people start kind of falling by the wayside because too many people here is not good. And he says, yeah, that's what I'm saying, is too many people is not good for the planet. So I was in the presence at least once of a Looney Tune who was totally okay with depopulation from an environmental perspective. I paint that little picture to say there are different things that we can talk about that are very, very nefarious, that some people could say, well, it's a means to an end. We got to save the planet, don't we? So, a few people getting sick, that's not so bad. So a long way to go to set the table for you to tell me who could be behind some of this stuff on any given side of different issues.
That's a very important tidbit you've shared, and it is absolutely a part of this equation. And I want to stress that climate engineering is not just a this or that scenario. There's many agendas being carried out, and you just alluded to one. So bottom line is, when we have former advisor to U.S. presidents, starting with President Johnson, and this individual lived until 2017, advising presidents all along the way, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Your listeners can look this up.
Yeah.
What he stated on the record with, quote, "With today's technology, it is infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control them," end quote, from a U.S. presidential advisor. There is no question that biological experimentation is a part of these operations. There's no question about that. As of 1977, as far back as 1977 from the Washington Post, they acknowledged on the record that even that far back, the U.S. military had conducted no less than 239 open-air biological tests on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians. How many have they done since that point in time? So again, two of the elements in the precipitation, polymer fibers and graphene, are used militarily as biological carrier platforms. What's that mean? It means to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. We have the second most recognized climate engineer, Dr. Ken Caldera, former Department of Defense scientist, that We own an audio of him stating in his words, what he did for the U.S. DoD was to design methods of spraying pathogens into clouds to infect the populations below. Do these dots not all connect? We had 85 countries infected in 3 days on the CB19 outbreak. That's indicative of airborne dispersion. We have Italian researchers that found CB19 attached to airborne particulates. Again, we can't know the true depth of what's happening in our skies. We do know it is nothing but malevolent, and we are all going to pay the price if it's allowed to continue.
That voice you hear is Dane Wigington. He's taking his place in the gold medal platform in the Another Side of Midnight award ceremony. Very pragmatic question. How do the people delivering these pathogens and carcinogens, they're putting themselves in harm's way. Are there people on this planet who are so powerful and so in the know that they are, for lack of a better term, inoculated from this behavior? In other words, are there people that are safe from what you're telling us that we're all being infected by?
We don't know of any means that they could completely exempt themselves from the consequences of what they're doing, but let's look at some of the consequences of what they have already done to themselves, because that's a primary question that so many people ask. This can't be going on because who are they?
Right.
They are those who print the money. They control militaries, thus they control governments,
right.
Thus they control the whole game. So bottom line is, what have they done to themselves already? They've detonated 2,400 plus nuclear bombs. That contaminated everything and everyone, including them, and they're building more now. So we have Fukushima, that's a triple nuclear meltdown.
Right.
No technology to fix it, no end in sight. Extinction level event by itself if other factors don't do the job first, which I would argue on the current course will be the case. And they're building 60 more nuke plants right now. There's 442 online, all of which will go into meltdown as society collapses. And again, we have data now available from, for example, the Nevada nuclear tests that Americans didn't know about at the time. We have peer-reviewed study now to prove that no less than 700,000, I think the figure was 695,000, Americans died as a direct effect from that, the downwinders they're called. Mm-hmm. And even with the soldiers, we see the historical film footage of the soldiers were told to jump out of your trench and run toward the blast center. And that's what they did. They all died early, painful deaths because of that. So again, those in power, we're not dealing with sanity, and we have psychoanalysis, DJ, of those in power. And here's the common thread. This is straight out of the manual. Quote, a near total lack of comprehension as to the consequences of their actions, even to themselves. We're not dealing with sanity. We're dealing with power addicts, headless, heartless, soulless cancer. That's who's in control.
Talking to Dane Wigington on Another Side of Midnight, 1-800-848-9222. If you've heard this stuff before, if this is the kind of thing that you live for, if you don't believe any of this, 1-800-848-9222. Dane, you mentioned the they. Is this an offshoot of, again, we're putting our Art Bell hats on again, which is a great hat to wear. It's always in fashion. For this time of morning, especially this kind of conversation, are we talking the Bilderberger thing? Is this that deep state Bilderberger Freemason? I'm just going to throw that big wide net for this time of the morning. Is this what we're talking about? Is there a possibility that there is something positive here? I mean, I'm being totally insane with that question. Is there an argument that somebody could make that there is a positive thing here? In other words, if they were put on trial, what would they say they were doing in our benefit?
No, it's a very appropriate question,
okay,
DJ. And so let me back into that.
Okay.
First, you have the power structure programmed so-called climate science community, and again, I'm not denying damage done to the planet. We've been horrific stewards of planet Earth. We're trashing our nest, and we're going to pay the price for that. But they have been taught, trained, programmed to believe that these programs, the climate engineering operations, are necessary. They term it a risk-to-risk scenario, the risk of doing it versus the risk of not doing it. And they take none of the consequences into account, which are far more horrific. Look at the pharmaceutical commercials, TJ, that you see for, take this for a certain symptom, and by the way, here's the 50 downstream side effects, which are really, they're not side effects, they're undesired direct effects. And when you listen to that commercial, you wonder who would take that pharmaceutical. And the next commercial is a law firm saying if you took last week's pharmaceutical and now you're permanently damaged, you can sue. And that's the mentality here.
Yeah.
So, again, we have people participating in the system that have long since lost their sense of reason, so they would try to convince us there's something benevolent here. There's nothing benevolent here. This is about power and control, and we see these operations being systematically used on agricultural regions, absolutely systematically targeted. Flash drought, flash hail, flash flood, flash freeze, which they can chemical freeze now. Again, these are patented processes. TJ, you've seen, in a first aid kit you can have sitting on a shelf at room temperature for 20 years, and you mix the ice pack chemicals together, you have an ice pack instantly, right?
Right.
Same thing on an atmospheric scale. And again, back to the money printers and your question about who they are, all roads lead to those who print the money, period. How is it the Pentagon's missing $30 trillion in the last 20 years that we know of? Where did that money even come from? We have no idea how much they're printing or where it's going. So again, those who control the purse strings control it all, period.
Dane Wigington is the voice and the mind behind geoengineeringwatch.org. We're talking on Another Side of Midnight here on 77 WABC. Dane, we know for a fact now that the Chinese government, for example, has been buying up farmland throughout the United States, and almost without exception, that farmland abuts, amazingly, military installations, a lot of Air Force bases. Is there any connection at all between foreign governments getting a real estate foothold in the United States with what you're talking about here? Is that like another wing of this conversation?
We know all major powers are colluding and cooperating on climate engineering behind the curtain. We have U.S. Senate documents, one of them 800 pages long, going all the way back to 1978, specifically calling for and outlining the, quote, cooperation between otherwise adversarial nations on this issue, climate engineering, because of the cross-border ramifications. It cannot be otherwise. They're definitely all working together on this for their own purposes, and you outlined one of those with the passenger you had 20 years ago. They know they can no longer sustain their populations. And so, again, whatever other surface conflicts and friction we may see between superpowers, and now that may be, in fact, morphing into atmospheric conflict between these same powers, just like mafia families that collude and cooperate to a point until there's not enough to go around, then they start to infight. We may be in that phase now. But we have congressional documents, again, in the case of the one I mentioned, 800 pages long, and your listeners can look at that. We're not asking anybody to believe anything we say at geoengineeringwatch.org. We're pleading with them to actually investigate. So that document they can find, geoengineeringwatch.org, massive Senate document. They'll find the important sections highlighted already. We're a massive data repository. The proof is absolutely indisputable, and yes, we have many causes and concerns, valid causes and concerns that we could focus our time and energy on. This is the biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, short of nuclear cataclysm, and even then, this is related because it's destroying our protective layers of the atmosphere, which leaves us susceptible to a large coronal mass ejection, CME, or solar flare. That shuts down grids around the globe. Now we have Fukushima times 100, 200. So it's connected even to nuclear everything. If we don't deal with this, all other causes and concerns will very soon be moot points. Ship goes down, and we're all passengers on it.
Wow. I could go on for days with you. Dane Wigington, let me ask you this. Without even asking a question, I'm just going to say a word and let you take it wherever it needs to go in this conversation. COVID.
Okay, this is, again, a sampling of what may be in store for us all very soon.
Okay.
So I mentioned earlier, polymer fibers and graphene are a part of the dispersion mix right now above our heads. We're inhaling these nanoparticles. We know they're experimenting with many other pathogens like Ebola and Marburg. Those are lethal pathogens, 90% mortality. What's to stop the powers that be that once they're losing control, once we reach the pitchforks and torches moment, the public is waking up, what's to stop them from using the already existing dispersion platforms with already existing elements in them that can carry Ebola or Marburg to the surface and level the playing field? Why would we think they wouldn't do that when they become desperate enough?
You were one of the first people I was pursuing when I took over this program, Another Side of Midnight. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. I had no idea how fascinating this would be. Dane Wigington, everyone, go right now to geoengineeringwatch.org. Learn more about Dane's work. Also, go and find his documentary, The Dimming. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org. Dane Wigington, it's not goodbye. It's just so long till next time. Definitely need to have you back and continue the conversation and take it in a few other directions. Very grateful for you joining us here on 77 WABC.
Deepest gratitude to you, DJ, and your listeners. Thank you for your voice in this battle. Greatly needed.
It's Another Side of Midnight, 77 WABC.